live on SF Live. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, in a large established city like San Francisco, where would you put a World's Fair?
Oh, that's a great question. We'll try and answer that on the air. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure where a good place to hold that would be now. The trend in with World's Fairs in the last few years in large cities has always been to sort of hold them on the outskirts and areas that were sort of, they were wanting to develop more. Expo 2005 was outside Nagoya in a sort of existing parkland that they redeveloped for that, because there aren't, in many cases, an area downtown. Shanghai is actually an exception. The World's Fair next year, they have a 1,300 acre site that's right next to downtown.
That's actually one of the largest World's Fair sites that's ever been created.
Yeah, it actually will be the largest World's Fair in history.
Really? Wow.
And it'll beat the record, the current record, which is 1904 in St. Louis. So it's quite a record.
Well, that's like the Great Wall. They like to do things big over there, I guess, huh?
But I as far as like a specific site, I'm not sure where we would hold it in San Francisco. Even cities like Edmonton, which are bidding for Expo 2017, they haven't even decided on a site. And during the sort of bidding process, that isn't always fleshed out ahead of time. I can always think of like plenty of places that would be great places to have it, like China Basin or in Treasure Island again. I mean, the Treasure Island again would be a great place to have it.
Well, that's certainly interesting, because with the bridges and everything in place now, maybe they would even build a BART extension to Treasure Island. Who knows? Well, in talking about what's necessary to bring a World's Fair into existence, I wanted to ask you a little bit about Shanghai, because I understand there was some controversy about whether we actually would participate in Shanghai, whether the United States would have a pavilion there or not. Can you tell us a little bit about that situation?
Well, it sort of gets back to the situation I talked about where, for Americans, they don't realize that World's Fairs still happen, or don't even know what World's Fairs are. And we're also in a sort of difficult situation in that back in the 1980s, Congress was upset that Spain wouldn't allow us to build missiles in Spain, and pointed at the Soviet Union. That might seem like a really old issue right now. But because of that, they wanted to punish Spain, and the way they did it was by withholding funds for a U.S. pavilion at Expo 92 in Seville. So because of that law, State Department funds can't go to actually build the pavilion.
It's been prohibited?
It's prohibited by law. Now, it's unclear as to whether or not Congress can appropriate funds on their own, separate from the State Department, to do that. But the consequence of that has been that the United States has had to go to private companies to do that.
Let's take another caller. We have someone else on the air. Hello, caller. You're on the air live on SF Live. Do you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering, what is the structure for who decides where the World's Fair goes? Is it like the Olympic Games? Is there some international body?
We'll try and answer that for you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, Urso, go ahead. Take it.
Well, back in 1851, when Prince Albert created the first World's Fair in London, there wasn't any international organization to handle this. And it wasn't until the late 20s before there were so many World's Fairs going on in so many different cities, so many different competing things calling themselves World's Fairs, that it was getting to be kind of a glut. And quite frankly, a lot of nations were just kind of, tired of having to pay for pavilion after pavilion in all these different cities. So an international body was created called the Bureau International des Expositions, which we call the BIE because we don't know how to speak French very well here, or at least I don't. So the BIE was created, and they are the sanctioning body for World's Fairs. So almost everything that you know as a World's Fair starting in like the 1930s would be sanctioned or recognized by the BIE. There have been a couple exceptions to that, such as the New York World's Fair in 64-65.
Oh, I was at that one.
Which was a big one, and everyone calls it World's Fair, and pretty much everyone recognizes a World's Fair now. But it was actually not recognized by the BIE at the time, because Robert Moses, who had planned it, had problems with the BIE, and plus Seattle had just hosted the 62 World's Fair in Seattle. So because of that, they weren't sanctioned. So there is sometimes will be an event that had been called a World's Fair that we kind of recognize as a World's Fair that wasn't sanctioned by the BIE. Since then, pretty much everything that we would consider to be a World's Fair has been. And starting with the year 2000, they've set up a structure so that every 5 years there will be a large World's Fair. That'll run for 6 months and with sort of a very broad theme, and then they allow for a smaller 3 month one in 1 year in between each one of those 5 years. That's sort of smaller. So the BIE sort of makes a difference between having sanctioned World's Fair, which are the large ones, or a recognized World's Fair, or recognized Expo, which are the sort of small ones.
So Shanghai is really sort of going to be the biggest of the big then. It's a 5-year big one, and they're devoting all this space to it, and it's really going to be kind of a historic occasion, I guess. So why wasn't the United States ready right from the start to participate in something of that magnitude?
Well, so like, as we were talking about earlier, private funding is the only way that a U.S. pavilion can happen right now. So getting back to Expo 92 in Seville, when Congress said the State Department couldn't provide funds for it, that set up a U.S. pavilion that many considered to be lackluster, which in part was sponsored by Amway and lots of sort of smaller corporations, and was kind of very basic. It came to a head with Expo 2000, where we had very elaborate plans in Hanover, Germany, for their expo, which was big turn of the millennium exposition, and they had devoted a huge plot of land. We had this huge plans for it, and the organizers just couldn't come up with the money for it. So it ended up opening with over 100 countries participating in a big lot of land, where the United States Pavilion was supposed to go with nothing in it.
Well, that really shows the influence of politics. It creeps into absolutely everything. It's kind of unfortunate. So for Shanghai now, will we actually be participating, or is it still under some kind of consideration?
It was really touch and go for a long time because they're still trying to put the money together to do it. For a while, it looked like that we weren't going to have one. They've announced that the State Department has said that we are definitely going to have one. I think they have about half of the money from corporations placed together. It's like a combination of Pepsi and Yum Brands and Corning and Walmart and all these different companies that, of course, have interest in China have done this. But they'll put it together. But again, it's kind of rough that everything's kind of happening at the last minute. Most other countries are already under construction and already have plans way in advance, and we've just started construction a couple weeks ago. So we're kind of behind the curve.
It'll be very exciting then, though, to see what they can come up with on so short notice. It's sort of like the Iron Chef of World's Fair construction projects, huh?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, the company that's doing a lot of the exhibits for it inside is it's called BRC Imagination Arts, and they're big World's Fair veterans. So if anyone can do it, they can do it. But it's kind of sad that we have to do all this at the last minute. But we'll be one of almost 200 countries in Shanghai, which will be a record for a number of countries as well participating.
So it's certainly something that we would want to participate in. I think it just sounds like it'll be very exciting to have all those different countries represented there.